When you think about the fight for freedom in America, where does your mind go? If you're like most of us, you probably picture a journey north, brave souls following the North Star on the Underground Railroad. But what if I told you that's only half the story? Because long before the famous path to the north, there was another, even more dangerous journey to freedom. A path not north, but south. This is the forgotten story of America's first legally free Black community, a place called Fort Mose, where freedom wasn't just a dream, but a reality defended with courage and blood. To really get Fort Mose, you have to understand the world it was born from. In the late 1600s and early 1700s, the British colonies, especially the Carolinas, were running on the brutal engine of chattel slavery. For an enslaved person, life was a nightmare of non-stop labor and cruelty. But even in that darkness, whispers started to spread, rumors of a different option, a beacon of hope shining from the south. That hope was Spanish Florida. In 1693, King Charles II of Spain issued a game-changing royal decree. It offered freedom to any enslaved person who escaped the British colonies and made it to Florida. There were just two conditions. You had to convert to Catholicism, and the men had to be willing to fight for Spain. For enslaved people in the Carolinas, this was a massive gamble. The journey was a death-defying trek through hundreds of miles of swamps, forests, and rattlesnake country, all while dodging bounty hunters. This life-or-death journey south is often described as the first Underground Railroad, a precursor to the more famous network going north. The first documented group made it in 1687, about 50 years before Fort Mose would even exist. This small party, 8 men, 2 women, and a nursing child, risked everything and proved it could be done. After that, the trickle of freedom seekers escaping south turned into a steady stream of pioneers on a path paved with incredible risk and even more incredible courage. By 1738, around 100 formerly enslaved Africans had made the perilous journey to St. Augustine. They kept their end of the bargain. They converted and joined the militia, but they were a community without a home. The Spanish governor, Manuel de Montiano, saw a strategic opportunity and a human necessity. 2 miles north of St. Augustine, he chartered a new town, Gracia Real de Santa Teresa de Mose. We just call it Fort Mose today. This wasn't just another military fort. It was the first legally sanctioned free Black settlement in the territory that would become the United States. Around 100 people, in over 20 households, built this town from scratch. It was a rugged frontier community of thatched huts and muddy ground, but it was theirs. Children were born here who would never feel a master's whip. Families torn apart by slavery were made whole. Leading this incredible community was Captain Francisco Menendez. Born in West Africa, captured and enslaved in the Carolinas, he escaped to Florida, where his leadership and bravery were impossible to ignore. Governor Montiano made him captain of the Fort Mose militia, making him the official leader of the town. Menendez was the living embodiment of Fort Mose, a place where a man who was once considered property could become a commander. So, what was life actually like at Fort Mose? Well, it was a fascinating mashup of cultures. Officially, the residents were Spanish subjects and devout Catholics, adopting Spanish names and customs. But they didn't erase their African heritage. Historians say the community kept a distinct African flavor, weaving their own traditions into their new lives. It was a truly unique society, a blend of different African ethnic groups living alongside and sometimes intermarrying with local Native American allies and poorer Spanish colonists. And we know this isn't just a story because archaeologists, led by Dr. Kathleen Deegan starting in 1986, literally dug up the proof. They found Spanish pottery mixed with Native American-style cooking pots, Catholic artifacts, alongside items from daily African traditions. The people of Fort Mose were creating a new identity in real time. The settlement existed in 2 main phases, first from 1738 to 1740, and again from 1752 to 1763. Across these periods, they proved that a free, self-governing Black community wasn't just possible, it was a reality. You can probably guess that a thriving, free Black community just south of the border was a huge problem for the British colonies and their slave-based economy. It was a beacon of freedom that inspired more people to escape, and the British wanted it gone. Their chance came in 1740, during a bigger conflict called the War of Jenkins' Ear. The British general from Georgia, James Oglethorpe, invaded Florida, aiming to capture St. Augustine. One of his first targets was Fort Mose, which the Spanish had briefly evacuated for strategic reasons. Oglethorpe's forces took the empty fort, planning to use it to launch their final attack. But Captain Menendez and his militia weren't about to sit back and watch. In a daring pre-dawn raid, Menendez led his militia, alongside Spanish troops and Yamasee allies, to take back their home. The fighting was savage and hand-to-hand. The British were caught completely by surprise and were routed. By sunrise, the fort belonged to Menendez and his men. The fight was so brutal, it became known as the Battle of Bloody Mose. It was a massive victory. The British suffered a devastating blow to their morale, and soon after, the entire invasion fell apart. The men of Fort Mose had not just fought for Spain, they had fought for their homes, their families, and their freedom. And they won. The people of Fort Mose rebuilt their town in 1752 and lived in freedom for another decade, defending Spanish Florida. But their fate was tied to the whims of European empires. In 1763, the 7 Years' War ended, and the Treaty of Paris redrew the map. Spain handed Florida over to Great Britain. For the residents of Fort Mose, this was a disaster. Staying in Florida meant being forced back into the slavery they had risked everything to escape. So they made a choice. When the Spanish citizens evacuated Florida for Cuba, the community of Fort Mose largely went with them. They left their homes, their fields, and the fort they had defended with their lives, choosing an unknown future in a new land over a certain one in chains. Back in Florida, Fort Mose was abandoned to the elements. The wood rotted, the walls eroded, and the marsh slowly swallowed the remains. For nearly 200 years, the story of America's first free Black community was literally buried and almost completely forgotten. That is, until the 1980s, when a team of archaeologists and historians led by Dr. Kathleen Deegan and Jane Landers rediscovered the site. Their painstaking work uncovered the fort's footprint and thousands of artifacts, bringing this lost chapter of American history roaring back to life. Thanks to their work, the site is now Fort Mose Historic State Park, a National Historic Landmark. And the cool part is, this story isn't just in the archives. If you're ever near St. Augustine, Florida, you can visit the park, walk the grounds, and see the interactive museum. They even completed a reconstruction of the 1738 fort, so you can step back in time and stand on the same ground where these freedom fighters built their lives. If you found this story as incredible as I do, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And for more stories that challenge what we think we know about the past, make sure you subscribe. The story of Fort Mose is so much more than a historical footnote. It's a powerful testament to the unbreakable human drive for freedom. It forces us to rethink American history, reminding us that the struggle for Black liberation is deeper and more complex than we're often taught. The men and women of Fort Mose weren't just escaping from something, they were building something. They were pioneers, warriors, and homesteaders who forged a life, a culture, and a legacy against impossible odds. Their fortress of freedom may have vanished for a time, but their story of courage and unyielding hope endures.